The two pink lines stared back at me from the little plastic stick, and the world tilted on its axis. Pregnant. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy crashed over me, so potent it left me breathless. A baby. Our baby. A tiny, perfect fusion of me and Jack, the man I loved with a ferocity that sometimes scared me. My hand trembled as I pressed it against my still flat stomach, a giddy, incredulous laugh bubbling up from my chest. We were going to be a family. The thought was a sunbeam, cutting through the gray morning light of my small Brooklyn apartment, illuminating a future I had only dared to dream of. But then, as quickly as the sunbeam had appeared, a cloud passed over it. A cold, familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my gut. Jack's family. The Worthings. The name alone felt heavy, like a velvet curtain thick with the dust of generations. They were old money, the kind that whispered in hushed tones in exclusive clubs and summered in sprawling cottages in the Hamptons. I was not that. I was a graphic designer from Queens, raised by a single mom who worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. My world was one of hustle and heart, of chasing dreams on a shoestring budget. Theirs was a world of inherited legacy, of expectations as rigid and unyielding as the marble columns of their Upper East Side mansion. Jack and I had met in a whirlwind of serendipity. 2 years ago, a classic New York story of a spilled coffee and a shared laugh that turned into a love affair that felt like a force of nature. With him, I was just Samantha, the woman he loved, the artist whose work he admired. He saw me, not my background. He was my safe harbor, my anchor in the often turbulent waters of his family's world. He loved me, I knew that without a doubt. But I also knew he was a product of that world, bound by its invisible threads of duty and expectation. And a baby conceived out of wedlock with a woman they considered an outsider was a complication the Worthings would not welcome with open arms. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, a strange mix of euphoria and dread. I tried to focus on work, but the lines on my screen blurred, the colors of my designs seeming to mock my inner turmoil. I kept replaying conversations with Jack's mother, Eleanor, in my head. Her polite, yet dismissive, inquiries about my little projects. The way her eyes would scan my carefully chosen outfits, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. She had never been overtly cruel, but there was a chill in her presence that always left me feeling like I was on the outside looking in, a guest who had overstayed her welcome. That evening, I cooked Jack his favorite meal, my hands moving on autopilot as my mind raced. I set the table in my cozy apartment, the soft glow of the candles a stark contrast to the harsh glare of my fears. I needed to tell him. We were in this together. His love would be my shield. He arrived looking like he had just stepped out of a magazine, his tailored suit and effortless charm a testament to his upbringing. He wrapped me in his arms, his familiar scent of sandalwood and success enveloping me. "Something smells amazing," he murmured, his lips brushing against my hair. "And you look radiant." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I have something to tell you," I said, my voice barely a whisper. We sat down to eat, but I could barely swallow a bite. I watched him talk about his day, about a deal he was closing, about the endless drama of his family's business. He was so confident, so at ease in his world. How could I, with my news, disrupt that perfect equilibrium? Finally, I couldn't bear it any longer. I took a deep breath and met his gaze across the table. "Nick," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I'm pregnant." The fork in his hand clattered against his plate. The easy smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of stunned silence. For a moment, he just stared at me, his blue eyes wide with a mixture of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. Then, a slow smile spread across his face, a genuine, breathtaking smile that reached his eyes. "Pregnant?" he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. He got up, came around the table, and pulled me into his arms, lifting me off my feet and spinning me around. That's incredible. Relief washed over me, so powerful it made me weak in the knees. He was happy. He was excited. I hid his face in his neck, inhaling his scent, letting his joy chase away my fears. I was so scared, I confessed. He set me down, his hands framing my face. Scared? Why? This is the best news I've ever heard. Your family, I whispered, the word a dark premonition. The light in his eyes flickered, just for a second, but it was enough to bring the cold knot of anxiety back to my stomach. He dropped his hands and ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Right, he said, his tone shifting from joyous to serious. My family. We'll have to handle them. Handle them. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and ominous. Not tell them, not share our news with them. Handle them. As if they were a problem to be managed, a crisis to be averted. And in that moment, I knew that this baby, our baby, was not a celebration for the Worthings. It was a scandal. And I was at the heart of it. The central conflict of our lives had just been established, not with a bang, but with two simple, terrifying words. The joy of my pregnancy was already being overshadowed by the long, dark shadow of his family. Jack held me close, whispering reassurances, telling me everything would be okay, that he would protect me. But as I stood there, wrapped in his arms, a cold dread seeped into my bones. I was no longer just Samantha, the woman he loved. I was the mother of a worthing heir, a role I had never auditioned for, and one that I was beginning to realize might cost me everything. The family meeting, as Jack had called it, was scheduled for the following Sunday. The dread that had taken root in my heart after our conversation had blossomed into a full-blown forest of anxiety. Jack, however, seemed to be in a state of determined denial. He spent the week assuring me that everything would be fine, that his parents just needed time to adjust to the idea. He bought me a beautiful, ridiculously expensive maternity dress from a designer I'd only ever seen in magazines, a soft flowing silk that was meant to make me feel like a princess. Instead, it felt like a costume, a disguise for the girl from Queens who was about to walk into the lion's den. The Worthing mansion was even more intimidating than I remembered. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement, a monument to generations of wealth and power. A stern-faced butler led us through a series of cavernous, art-filled rooms to the library, where Eleanor and her husband Richard were waiting. The room was paneled in dark, gleaming wood, the shelves lined with leather-bound books that looked as if they had never been touched. A fire crackled in the hearth, but it offered no warmth. Only a flickering, judgmental light. Eleanor was perched on a velvet armchair, a picture of icy elegance in a cashmere sweater set. Richard stood by the fireplace, a formidable presence in a tailored tweed jacket. He was a man of few words, but his silence was more unnerving than any outburst. He had a way of looking at you that made you feel like a specimen under a microscope. Your flaws and imperfections magnified for his cold, analytical gaze. Samantha, Eleanor said, her voice as smooth and cool as polished marble. How nice of you to join us. Jack, bless his heart, tried to inject a note of cheerfulness into the frigid atmosphere. Mom, Dad, he said, his hand tightening on mine. We have some wonderful news. He didn't wait for their response. He just blurted it out, his voice a little too loud in the silent room. Liv and I are having a baby. The silence that followed was so profound, so absolute, that I could hear the frantic thumping of my own heart. Eleanor's carefully constructed smile didn't waver, but her eyes, when they met mine, were as cold and hard as diamonds. Richard's expression remained unchanged, but a muscle twitched in his jaw. A baby, Eleanor repeated, the words dripping with a condescending sweetness that made my skin crawl. How unexpected. We're thrilled, I said, my voice coming out stronger than I expected. I would not be intimidated. I would not let them see my fear. "I'm sure you are," Eleanor said, her gaze sweeping over me, lingering for a moment on my stomach, as if she could already see the unwelcome life growing inside me. "But you must understand, Samantha, that a child is a serious responsibility. It requires planning, stability, a certain pedigree." The insult was as sharp and clean as a shard of glass. She was calling me a gold digger, a commoner who had trapped her son. I felt a hot flush of anger rise in my cheeks, but before I could respond, Jack stepped in. "Mom, that's enough," he said, his voice firm. "We love each other. We're having a baby. This is happening." Richard spoke for the first time, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "Is it, Jack? Is it really happening?" He turned his cold gaze on me. "Or is this just a temporary situation?" The implication was clear. They wanted me to have an abortion. They were not just suggesting it, they were expecting it. The air in the room grew thick, suffocating. I felt like I was drowning, the weight of their disapproval pressing down on me, crushing the joy that had so briefly illuminated my world. "This is not a temporary situation," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. "This is our child." Eleanor sighed, a long, theatrical sigh of weary disappointment. "My dear, you are being naive. A child born out of wedlock, it would be a scandal. It would damage the family name. It would have consequences." And so began the campaign of psychological warfare. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor became a constant, insidious presence in my life. She would call me at all hours, her voice a silken whisper of concern, offering advice that was nothing more than thinly veiled criticism. She sent me articles about the difficulties of single motherhood, about the social stigma of illegitimate children. She even had the audacity to offer me money, a generous settlement, to start a new life, somewhere far away from her son. Jack, caught in the crossfire, grew increasingly agitated. He loved me, I knew he did, but he was a man who had been conditioned from birth to please his parents, to uphold the family name. He started to echo their concerns, his reassurances laced with a new, troubling note of doubt. "Maybe we should wait," he'd say, his eyes pleading with me to understand. "Maybe we're not ready for this. It's all happening so fast." I felt like I was losing him, like he was being pulled away from me by an invisible tide of wealth and expectation. The man who had once been my anchor was now adrift, and I was left to navigate the stormy waters of his family's disapproval alone. Eleanor's tactics grew more sophisticated, more insidious. She stopped the overt calls and instead began a subtle campaign of social isolation. Invitations to events Jack and I usually attended together mysteriously stopped arriving for me. Friends of the family, once cordial, now offered polite but distant greetings, their eyes darting away as if I carried a contagion. Jack, oblivious or perhaps willfully ignorant, would often attend these events alone, returning home with a strained smile and vague excuses about why I hadn't been invited. Each snub, each whispered rumor was a tiny cut slowly bleeding me dry of confidence and connection. I found myself retreating, spending more time alone in my apartment, the vibrant city outside feeling increasingly hostile. The silence of my small space, once a comfort, now felt like a cage, amplifying the whispers of doubt Eleanor had so expertly planted. Jack, meanwhile, was a man divided. One moment, he would hold me close, swearing his love and promising to stand by me, his hand gently caressing my burgeoning belly, his voice filled with the tender hopes we once shared. The next, he would be on the phone with his mother, his voice hushed, his brow furrowed with worry, a palpable tension radiating from him. He started suggesting compromises, small at first, then larger, each one a concession to his family's relentless pressure. "Maybe we could get married quietly, just us," he proposed, a desperate plea in his eyes. and then announce the baby later after things have settled. It would be less disruptive. Or what if we moved out of the city for a while, just until the baby is born, away from all the attention? A fresh start just for us. Each suggestion, however well-intentioned, felt like another step away from the future we had envisioned together, another erosion of our shared dreams. He was trying to protect me, I knew, but in doing so, he was slowly eroding my trust, making me feel like a burden, a problem to be solved, rather than a partner to be cherished. His love, once a fortress, was now a crumbling wall, unable to withstand the siege of his family's influence. Then came the first major plot twist, the one that shifted the ground beneath my feet. Eleanor summoned Jack and me to another family meeting. This time, the atmosphere was even more tense, the air thick with an unspoken urgency that made my skin prickle. She informed us that the family business, a multi-billion-dollar corporation, was in the final stages of a merger with a Japanese conglomerate. The deal, she explained, was worth a fortune, and it was contingent on the family maintaining a pristine public image. The Japanese partners, she said, were very traditional, and any hint of scandal could jeopardize the entire deal. Her words were delivered with the precision of a surgeon, each one designed to inflict maximum damage. A premarital pregnancy, she said, her eyes locking onto mine, cold and unyielding, would be seen as a sign of instability. It would be a deal breaker. Her voice was devoid of emotion, a cold, clinical assessment of a business risk. She laid out the numbers, the potential losses, the devastating impact on the family's legacy, on Jack's future inheritance, on the very fabric of their carefully constructed world. It was a performance, chilling in its precision, designed to overwhelm and intimidate, to make me feel the crushing weight of their entire empire resting on my shoulders. The financial threat was a masterstroke. It was no longer just about the family name, it was about the family fortune, a tangible, quantifiable loss that even Jack couldn't ignore. The pressure on Jack intensified, the weight of his family's legacy now resting squarely on his shoulders, threatening to buckle him. He became distant, his face etched with a constant worry, his once bright eyes now shadowed with a profound weariness. Our conversations became strained, our once easy intimacy replaced by a growing chasm of unspoken fears and resentments. He started spending more time at the office, claiming long hours were necessary to manage the merger, but I knew deep down he was escaping, seeking refuge in the familiar world of finance, away from the uncomfortable reality of our impending parenthood and his family's relentless pressure. He was choosing his inheritance, his comfort over me and our child, a truth that pierced my heart with icy precision. It was during this time that I found an unlikely ally, or so I thought. Jack's younger sister, Chloe, had always been the black sheep of the family, a free-spirited artist who seemed to chafe under the rigid constraints of the Worthing name. She reached out to me, her voice a warm and welcome contrast to the icy tones of her mother. She invited me for coffee away from the prying eyes of the family in a small, bohemian cafe in the West Village, a place where art and individuality were celebrated. She told me she was on my side, that she thought her parents were being archaic and cruel, their values outdated and suffocating. She spoke of her own struggles with their expectations, her desire to break free from the gilded cage of their wealth, to forge her own path. She became my confidant, the one person I could talk to about my fears, my hopes, my growing sense of isolation. Her empathy felt like a lifeline in a sea of hostility, a beacon of understanding in a world that had turned cold. I poured my heart out to her, telling her everything. I told her about Eleanor's manipulative phone calls, about Jack's wavering resolve, about the crushing weight of the financial threat that loomed over us. I confessed my fears about raising a child alone, about the daunting prospect of facing the Worthing's wrath without Jack's unwavering support. She listened with a sympathetic ear, her eyes wide with what I believed was genuine concern, offering words of comfort and encouragement. She told me to be strong, to fight for my baby, to not let her family destroy our love. She even suggested ways I could subtly push back, encouraging me to stand my ground, to assert my independence, to find my own voice amidst the cacophony of their demands. Her advice felt genuine, her support a balm to my wounded spirit. I truly believed she was my friend, my only ally within that formidable family, a sister I had never had. And then came the second twist, the one that shattered my already fragile world into a million irreparable pieces. I had lunch with a friend of mine, Sarah, a sharp-witted investigative journalist who had a knack for digging up dirt, for unearthing the uncomfortable truths hidden beneath polished facades. I told her about my situation, the Japanese merger, the pressure from the Worthings, the whole elaborate charade. Sarah, being the good friend she was and always sniffing out a good story, did some digging. What she found was a bombshell. The Japanese merger was a lie. There was no deal. It was a complete fabrication, a carefully constructed ruse to manipulate Jack and pressure me into having an abortion. The entire narrative of financial ruin was a meticulously crafted illusion, a weapon wielded by Eleanor to achieve her desired outcome, a cruel and calculated deception. But that wasn't the worst of it. My friend also discovered that Chloe, my supposed ally, was in on the whole thing. She had been feeding every word of our conversations back to Eleanor, every fear, every doubt, every secret hope, every vulnerable confession. Chloe's sympathetic ear, her comforting words, her subtle advice that it had all been a performance, a cruel charade designed to extract information and further isolate me, to make me believe I had an ally when all I had was another enemy. She was a spy, a pawn in her mother's cruel game, a willing participant in my emotional torment. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, that it left me reeling, gasping for air. I had been played, my vulnerability used against me, my trust shattered beyond repair. The one person I had trusted, the one person who had offered a glimmer of hope, had turned out to be another instrument of my tormentors. I was completely and utterly alone, the illusion of friendship crumbling around me, leaving me exposed and vulnerable, a raw nerve ending in a hostile world. It's strange how these dark family secrets connect us. If this story is getting under your skin, subscribe for more real family exposés. Armed with this new, devastating knowledge, I felt a shift within me. The hurt and the fear were still there, raw and throbbing, but they were now mingled with a cold, hard anger, a righteous fury that began to simmer beneath the surface, threatening to erupt. I would not be a victim. I would not be a pawn in their game. I decided to do some digging of my own, fueled by a desperate need for leverage, for a way to fight back against the relentless tide of their manipulation. I spent hours online, poring over old articles, society pages, public records, anything that might offer a chink in their armor, a crack in their perfect facade. I delved into the Worthing family history, searching for any skeletons in their meticulously organized closets, any hint of scandal that could be turned against them. It was a tedious, frustrating process, but I was driven by a fierce determination to protect myself and my unborn child, to carve out a future where we could be safe and free. And then I found it. A small, almost forgotten news item from 35 years ago. A brief mention of Eleanor Worthing, then Eleanor Davenport, being sent away to a sanitarium in Switzerland for exhaustion. It was a common euphemism in those days for a host of inconvenient truths, a polite way to sweep scandal under the rug, to maintain the illusion of perfection. The article was vague, but it sparked a flicker of recognition, a memory of something Jack had once casually mentioned about his mother's delicate health in her youth, a throwaway comment I had dismissed at the time. I dug deeper, cross-referencing names and dates, and with the help of Sarah, my journalist friend, I managed to track down a retired nurse who had worked at that very sanitarium. For a price, a substantial one, she was willing to talk. Her memory, though old, was sharp, and her resentment towards the wealthy families who had used the sanitarium as a discreet dumping ground for their inconvenient secrets was still potent, a simmering anger that I could now harness. And so, the third and final twist of this intense, soul-crushing development was revealed. Eleanor had been pregnant. Not just pregnant, but unmarried and pregnant. a cardinal sin in her conservative, high society world, a transgression that would have shattered her own family's reputation. She had been sent away to have the baby in secret, a child who was then immediately given up for adoption, never to be spoken of again, erased from the family history as if they had never existed. The hypocrisy was staggering, a bitter irony that twisted my gut. The woman who was so obsessed with purity and reputation, who was trying to force me to have an abortion, had a secret child of her own, a child she discarded to protect her own social standing, her own carefully constructed facade. Her relentless pursuit of control, her pathological need for a flawless public image, was rooted in her own buried shame and trauma, a desperate attempt to rewrite her own past by controlling the future of others. The revelation was a game changer. It was the weapon I needed to fight back, a truth so explosive it could shatter the very foundation of the Worthing Empire, exposing their carefully guarded secrets to the harsh light of public scrutiny. The question was, did I have the courage to use it? And what would be the cost to my own soul if I did? Would I become just like them, wielding secrets as weapons, or could I use this truth to finally break free? The revelation of Eleanor's own hidden past, the child she had been forced to give up, burned within me like a vengeful fire. It was a weapon, yes, but a double-edged one. To expose her would be to expose a child, an innocent, to the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Was I willing to do that? Was I willing to become as ruthless as the Worthings themselves? The question gnawed at me, even as the pressure mounted, day by agonizing day. Jack, meanwhile, was a ghost of his former self. The charming, confident man I had fallen in love with had been replaced by a hollow-eyed stranger, constantly on edge. His phone a permanent fixture in his hand, buzzing with calls from his mother. He would disappear for hours, returning with vague explanations and a fresh layer of despair clinging to him. He was being systematically broken, and I, despite my anger, felt a pang of pity for the man I once knew. His eyes, once so full of light and adoration, now held a haunted, desperate plea, a silent apology for the man he was becoming under the crushing weight of his family's expectations. He'd try to hold me, to comfort me, but his touch felt distant. His reassurances hollow. The chasm between us widened with each passing day, filled with unspoken fears and the suffocating presence of his mother's influence. Then came the day of the ultimatum. It wasn't a formal meeting in the library this time, but a summons to their sprawling Greenwich estate, a place I had only visited once before, for a charity gala where I had felt utterly out of place, a mere accessory to Jack's dazzling presence. This time, there was no pretense of civility. The air crackled with a predatory tension. The entire family was there. Eleanor, a queen on her throne of ice, Richard, her silent, formidable consort, and even Chloe, who avoided my gaze, her face a mask of carefully constructed indifference, a betrayal etched into every line of her posture. They sat around a polished mahogany table in a room that felt more like a boardroom than a family dining room, the air thick with unspoken accusations and cold, calculated intent. The scent of old money, of polished wood and expensive flowers felt cloying, suffocating. Eleanor, as always, was the orchestrator, her voice a silken blade. She began with a chillingly calm recitation of my perceived transgressions, my humble origins, my unsuitable profession, my audacity to trap her son. She spoke as if I were not even present, a problem to be dissected and disposed of, a stain on their pristine lineage. Her words were designed to strip me of my dignity, to make me feel small and insignificant. Richard, for his part, laid out the financial implications, the supposed damage my pregnancy would inflict on their carefully constructed empire. He spoke of stock prices, of investor confidence, of the family's legacy, as if a human life could be quantified in terms of market value, a mere line item on a balance sheet. He detailed the potential loss of a multi-billion-dollar investment, a deal with a powerful Saudi consortium that, unlike the fabricated Japanese merger, was very real and very much at risk. The pressure was immense, designed to make me feel responsible for the potential ruin of an entire dynasty. Then came the offer. A sum of money so astronomical it made my head spin. Enough to buy a small house, to start my own business, to live comfortably for years. It was presented not as a bribe, but as a generous severance package, a means for me to discreetly disappear and start a new life, far away from them. The unspoken condition, of course, was the abortion. It hung in the air, a dark, suffocating presence, more tangible than the crisp $100 bills they had laid out on the table, a stark symbol of their power and my perceived worthlessness. Or, Eleanor continued, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper that sent a shiver down my spine, we can make sure you never work in this city again. We can ensure that every door you try to open slams shut in your face. We can make your life very, very difficult. And as for Jack, she paused, letting her words hang in the air, a silent threat that resonated with the full weight of their influence. He will be disinherited, cut off. He will lose everything. His career, his future, his very identity. All because of your stubbornness. My gaze flickered to Jack. He sat beside his mother, his shoulders slumped, his face pale and drawn, a man utterly broken. He looked utterly defeated, a puppet whose strings had been expertly manipulated, his spirit crushed under the weight of his family's expectations. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He couldn't. He was already gone, lost to the suffocating embrace of his family's power, a prisoner in his own gilded cage. Jack, I pleaded, my voice cracking, a desperate last effort to reach the man I had loved. Tell them this is wrong. Tell them you won't let them do this. He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, heartbreaking anguish, a flicker of the man I once knew struggling to break free. Liv, he began, his voice barely a whisper, raw with pain. They're right. It's the only way. For us. For our future. He reached across the table, his hand trembling as he took mine, his grip weak and uncertain. Please, Liv, please. We can get through this. We can start over. Just do this one thing. For us. His words were a desperate plea, a twisted act of love, asking me to sacrifice everything for a future that would be built on a lie, on the ashes of our child. His words were a physical blow, a betrayal so profound it stole the air from my lungs. The man I loved, the man who had promised to protect me, was begging me to sacrifice our child, to sacrifice a part of myself, for the sake of his family's reputation and fortune. He was choosing them. He was choosing their money, their power, their twisted sense of honor over me, over our baby, over everything we had built together. The illusion of our love, of our shared future, shattered into a million pieces around me. I pulled my hand away as if his touch had burned me, the warmth of his skin now feeling like a brand. The anger, the hurt, the profound sense of disillusionment coalesced into a cold, hard resolve. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, the sound echoing in the stunned silence of the room, a defiant roar in the face of their quiet cruelty. My voice, when it came, was steady, though it felt like a stranger's, imbued with a newfound strength. You want me to disappear? I said, my gaze sweeping over each of them, lingering on Eleanor's impassive face, on Richard's cold, calculating eyes, on Chloe's averted gaze, and finally on Jack's broken, pleading expression. You want me to erase this child, to erase myself for your convenience? For your precious reputation? For your blood money? Eleanor merely raised an eyebrow, a faint, condescending smile playing on her lips, as if my outburst was nothing more than a childish tantrum. It's for the best, dear. For everyone involved. You'll thank us one day. No, I said, my voice rising, gaining strength with each word, a crescendo of defiance. It's for your best? It's for your twisted sense of propriety, your obsession with appearances. But it's not for me. And it's certainly not for my baby. You think you can buy my silence, buy my compliance? You think you can control my body, my life, my choices? You are wrong. I turned to Jack, my heart aching with a grief so profound it felt like a physical wound, a gaping hole where our love used to be. You, I said, my voice trembling now, but with sorrow, not fear. You were supposed to be different. You were supposed to be my partner, my protector, but you're just like them. A coward, trapped in their gilded cage, too weak to stand up for what's right, too afraid to lose your precious inheritance. Without another word, I walked out. I left the mansion, the money, the threats, and the man I had loved behind me. I drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring into a kaleidoscope of pain and confusion. The betrayal was a fresh wound, bleeding profusely, but beneath the agony, a strange sense of clarity began to emerge from the wreckage of my shattered dreams. I had lost everything, but I had also gained something invaluable, my freedom. The freedom to choose, to decide my own fate, to protect the life growing inside me, a life that was now entirely mine to nurture and defend. I called my journalist friend, Sarah, my voice hoarse with unshed tears but laced with a new, steely resolve. I told her everything, the whole sordid tale, from the initial joy of the pregnancy to Jack's ultimate betrayal to the Worthing's final, despicable ultimatum. I told her about Eleanor's past, the secret child, the hypocrisy that fueled her cruelty. Sarah listened, her silence a comforting presence on the other end of the line, her sharp mind already piecing together the narrative. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. She simply said, "What do you want to do, Liv? This is your story now." "I want to fight," I said, the words surprising even myself, a primal roar erupting from deep within. "I want to expose them. I want to make sure no one else ever has to go through what I've been through. I want to tell the world what they did." Sarah, ever the pragmatist, cautioned me. "It'll be messy, Liv. They'll come after you with everything they've got. They'll try to discredit you, to ruin you, to bury you under a mountain of lies and legal threats. Are you ready for that?" "Let them," I said, a new fierce determination, hardening my voice, my resolve as unyielding as steel. I have nothing left to lose, and I have a child to protect. They underestimated me once. They won't do it again. But as the days turned into weeks and the initial surge of defiance began to wane, the brutal reality of my situation set in. I was pregnant, alone, and facing the wrath of one of the most powerful families in New York. The thought of a protracted legal battle, of public humiliation, of the endless scrutiny began to chip away at my resolve. I was tired, so incredibly tired. The morning sickness was relentless, the fatigue overwhelming, each day a battle against nausea and exhaustion. I started to question my choices, my strength, my ability to face this alone. The fear, though subdued, was a constant, gnawing presence. Eleanor, sensing my vulnerability, renewed her assault with a chilling precision. She sent me a series of anonymous threats, subtle at first, then increasingly overt. My freelance design contracts mysteriously dried up, clients suddenly citing unforeseen circumstances or a change in creative direction. My landlord, who had always been perfectly amenable, suddenly became difficult, hinting at an impending eviction, citing spurious complaints from neighbors. It was a slow, suffocating squeeze, designed to break me, to force me to capitulate, to make me believe that resistance was futile. One morning, a package arrived. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, was a small, exquisitely crafted silver locket. It was beautiful, but it felt sinister, a gilded cage rather than a piece of jewelry. Attached was a card, written in Eleanor's elegant, looping script. "It's not too late, dear. Think of your future. Think of your child's future. There are other ways." The message was clear: have the abortion, and all this would stop. The locket was a symbol of the life I could have, free from their persecution, if only I made the right choice, their choice. It was a final, desperate attempt to break my will, to buy my compliance with the promise of peace. I stared at the locket, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The thought of ending the pregnancy, of escaping this nightmare, was tempting, a siren song promising peace and oblivion. I was exhausted, emotionally battered, and utterly alone. The weight of the world felt too heavy to bear. I booked an appointment at a clinic using the anonymous contact Eleanor had provided. I told myself it was for the best, for the baby, for my future. I told myself I was being strong, making a difficult but necessary choice. I tried to rationalize it, to convince myself that this was the only way out, the only path to survival. The day of the appointment dawned gray and cold, mirroring the landscape of my soul. I drove to the clinic, the locket clutched in my hand, a heavy weight against my palm, a constant reminder of the choice I was about to make. The building was discreet, unassuming, tucked away on a quiet street, its anonymity a stark contrast to the public spectacle my life had become. Inside, the waiting room was hushed, filled with other women, their faces etched with a similar mix of fear and resignation, their stories untold, their burdens heavy. I sat down, my hands clasped over my still flat stomach, feeling a profound sense of emptiness, a void where hope used to be. As I waited, a young woman entered the waiting room, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed, her youth a stark contrast to the gravity of her situation. She looked no older than 18, a child herself, forced to make an impossible decision. She sat across from me, nervously fiddling with the strap of her purse, her gaze distant, lost in her own pain. Our eyes met for a fleeting moment, and in her gaze I saw my own fear, my own vulnerability, magnified. But I also saw something else, a flicker of defiance, a desperate hope for a different path, a silent question in her eyes that mirrored my own. And in that moment, something shifted within me. A sudden, searing clarity like a lightning bolt striking through the fog of my despair. I looked down at the locket in my hand, then at my stomach, then back at the young woman across from me. This wasn't about Eleanor or Jack or the Worthings. This was about me. This was about my body, my choice, my child. I had allowed them to dictate my life, to manipulate my emotions, to push me to the brink of a decision I knew, deep in my heart, was wrong. I had almost let them win. I had almost sacrificed my autonomy, my child, my very soul to their cruel machinations. But no more. The fight was not over. It had just begun. I stood up, the locket falling from my grasp and clattering softly on the linoleum floor, a symbolic shedding of their chains. The sound seemed to echo in the quiet room, a declaration of independence. The young woman looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and understanding. I didn't say a word. I just walked out. I left the clinic, the locket and the suffocating weight of their expectations behind me. The cold air outside felt like a cleansing breath, a promise of a new beginning, a fresh start. I was still scared, still alone, but I was no longer defeated. I was free. Free to choose, free to fight, free to be a mother. This moment shattered everything I knew. If you're feeling this shock too, hit like. It helps uncover more hidden family truths. I walked for what felt like miles, the crisp autumn air invigorating my lungs, clearing the fog from my mind. The city, once a source of overwhelming pressure, now felt like a canvas, a place of endless possibilities, a vibrant backdrop to my newfound resolve. I was going to have this baby. I was going to raise this child on my own terms, with my own strength, with every fiber of my being. The Worthings could do their worst. They could try to ruin me, to discredit me, to make my life difficult. But they could not take away my resolve. They could not take away my child. And they could not take away my voice. My voice, which would now be heard, loud and clear. I pulled out my phone, my fingers flying across the screen, a surge of adrenaline coursing through me. I called Sarah. "I'm out," I said, my voice firm, clear, and full of a newfound power, a strength I hadn't known I possessed. "I'm not doing it, and I'm ready to tell my story. All of it. The real story." Sarah's voice was filled with a mixture of relief and excitement. "I knew you had it in you, Liv. This is going to be huge. This is the story of a lifetime." "It's not about being huge," I said, looking up at the towering skyscrapers, symbols of the very power I was now defying, their cold, imposing facades no longer intimidating. "It's about being heard. It's about fighting for what's right. And it's about protecting my child. It's about proving that love and truth can triumph over money and manipulation." The battle was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. But for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope, a spark of courage that had been buried beneath layers of fear and despair. I was no longer a victim. I was a mother, a fighter, and I was ready to face whatever the Worthings threw at me. My child deserved nothing less. And so did I. The decision to walk out of that clinic was the single most terrifying and liberating moment of my life. It was a declaration of war, and the Worthings, true to form, retaliated with the full force of their considerable power. The story Sarah published, a meticulously researched and devastating expose of the Worthing family's hypocrisy and cruelty, went viral. It was a firestorm, igniting a media frenzy that painted me as both a victim and a villain, a gold digger and a saint. The Worthings' army of lawyers and public relations experts worked overtime, painting me as an unstable, opportunistic woman who had fabricated a story to extort money from a prominent family. They dragged my name through the mud, dissecting my past, my family, my very character in the court of public opinion. Every detail of my life, from my modest childhood home to my college scholarships, was scrutinized and twisted to fit their narrative of a manipulative outsider. But something had irrevocably shifted within me. The woman who had once been so intimidated by their wealth and power was gone, replaced by a mother fiercely protective of her unborn child. I had nothing to lose, and that made me fearless. I cut off all contact with Jack and his family, changed my number, and with the last of my savings and a small advance from a book deal that Sarah had helped me secure, I disappeared. I left New York, the city of my dreams and my nightmares, and moved to a small, quiet town on the West Coast, a place where no one knew my name, where I could breathe again. The salty air of the Pacific Northwest, the towering evergreen trees, and the slower pace of life offered a balm to my wounded soul. It was a fresh start, a chance to rebuild not just my life, but myself. The first few years were a struggle, a relentless uphill battle against financial strain, emotional exhaustion, and the lingering shadows of trauma. I was a single mother with a newborn baby, haunted by the trauma of my past and the constant fear that the Worthings would somehow find me. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, cradling Leo, wondering if I had made the right choice, if I was strong enough to carry this burden alone. But then I would look at his innocent face, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger, and a fierce resolve would ignite within me. He was my anchor, my reason, my unwavering source of strength. I poured all my energy, all my creativity into my freelance design work, slowly but surely building a new life for us, one pixel at a time. I took on every project, no matter how small, working late into the nights after Leo was asleep, fueled by coffee and an unshakable determination. My designs, once vibrant and bold, now carried a deeper resonance, a quiet strength that clients responded to. I found a community of other artists and entrepreneurs, women who, like me, were forging their own paths, unbound by convention or expectation. They were single mothers, women who had left abusive relationships, artists who had dared to dream beyond the confines of corporate life. Their camaraderie and support became my new family, a chosen tribe that understood the quiet battles I fought every day. I discovered a strength I never knew I possessed, a resilience born from the ashes of my shattered past, a quiet power that hummed beneath my skin. Leo was my sun, my moon, and all my stars. He was a bright, curious, and joyful child, with my eyes and Jack's smile a constant bittersweet reminder of the love that had once been. He had Jack's easy charm, his quick wit, but also my stubborn independence and a deep, empathetic soul. I watched him grow, his laughter filling the small house I had managed to rent, his crayon drawings adorning the walls of my home office, each one a masterpiece in my eyes. He was my reason for everything, the living, breathing embodiment of the choice I had made, the choice to honor my body, my spirit, and my child. Every milestone, every scraped knee, every bedtime story was a victory, a testament to our resilience, a quiet defiance against the forces that had tried to break us. As the years passed, the storm of the scandal faded, replaced by the quiet rhythm of our new life. My design business flourished, allowing me to buy a small, charming house with a garden where Leo could play. I became a successful graphic designer, my work sought after for its unique blend of artistry and emotional depth, often focusing on projects that empowered women and supported social causes. I had built a life that was my own, a life of purpose and peace, a life that was a testament to the power of a woman's will. The Worthings and the man who had broken my heart became a distant memory, a scar that had faded but would never completely disappear, a reminder of how far I had come. Then one crisp autumn afternoon, 7 years after I had walked out of that clinic, he found me. I was at a local park, pushing Leo on the swings, his delighted laughter echoing in the cool air, a sound that always filled my heart with pure joy. I looked up and saw him standing there, a few feet away, his face a mixture of awe and trepidation. He was older, his hair flecked with gray at the temples, his eyes etched with a sadness that hadn't been there before. The tailored suit was gone, replaced by a simple pair of jeans and a worn leather jacket. He looked ordinary, human. Stripped of the gilded armor of his family's wealth, he seemed smaller, more vulnerable, a shadow of the man I had once known. My first instinct was to run, to grab Leo and flee, to protect him from the ghost of a past he knew nothing about. But I was no longer that scared, broken woman. I was a mother, a survivor, a woman who had faced down her demons and emerged stronger, forged in the fires of adversity. I stood my ground, my hand resting protectively on Leo's back, a silent shield against the past. "Samantha," he said, his voice hoarse, as if he hadn't used it in years, a whisper of a forgotten melody. I've been looking for you. For a long time. I never stopped." "Why?" I asked, my voice cold, devoid of the emotion that was churning within me, a carefully constructed wall against the resurgence of old pain. "What do you want, Jack? What could you possibly want now?" He took a hesitant step forward, his eyes fixed on Leo, who had stopped swinging and was now staring at Jack with a child's open curiosity, a silent question in his innocent gaze. Is he mine?" he asked, his voice barely audible, a fragile hope in his eyes. "His name is Leo," I said, my voice softening slightly as I looked at my son, then back at Jack. "And yes, he's yours. He's always been yours in a way you never chose to acknowledge." The look on his face was a mixture of joy and profound, gut-wrenching regret. Tears welled in his eyes, and he took another step forward, his hand outstretched as if to touch Leo, then let it fall to his side, a gesture of both longing and self-restraint. "He's beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. We talked for hours that day, after I had taken Leo home and left him with a trusted neighbor, a kind, elderly woman who had become like a grandmother to him. We sat on a bench overlooking the ocean, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, a dramatic backdrop to the quiet unraveling of our past. He told me everything. He told me how he had been a coward, how he had let his family's power and his own weakness destroy the best thing that had ever happened to him. He spoke of the years of regret, the gnawing guilt, the constant ache of my absence. He told me how, after I had left, He had tried to follow his family's wishes, to forget about me, to move on, but he couldn't. The guilt and the regret had eaten away at him, hollowing him out from the inside, leaving him a shell of the man he once was. He told me that he had finally broken free from their control a few years ago, after a bitter and protracted legal battle that had cost him his inheritance but had given him back his soul. He had walked away from the Worthing empire, from the money, the power, the suffocating expectations. He had been living a quiet, simple life, trying to atone for his past, trying to become a man worthy of the woman he had lost, a man worthy of the child he had abandoned. He spoke of therapy, of self-discovery, of the painful process of dismantling the gilded cage he had been born into. He had found a new purpose, working for a nonprofit that supported young artists, a quiet rebellion against his family's corporate world. "I know I have no right to ask this," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he turned to face me, his eyes pleading, raw with vulnerability. "But I've never stopped loving you. Live. Not for a single day. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I have to ask. Can we start over? Can we be a family? A real family this time." His gaze was earnest, hopeful, filled with a desperate longing for redemption. His words, once the only thing I'd ever wanted to hear, now felt like a foreign language, a relic from a life I no longer lived. I looked at him, at the man who had been the love of my life, the father of my child, the source of my greatest joy and my deepest pain. I saw the sincerity in his eyes, the genuine remorse in his voice, and I felt nothing. The fire of my love for him had long since burned out, leaving behind only the cold ashes of a memory, a faint echo of a love that had been irrevocably broken. My heart, once so open and vulnerable, was now a fortress, built brick by brick with resilience and self-preservation. "No, Jack," I said, my voice gentle but firm, a quiet strength resonating in each word. "We can't. That ship sailed a long time ago. You made your choice and I made mine. And my choice led me to a life of peace and strength, a life where I am truly free." He flinched, as if I had struck him, his face falling, the hope draining from his eyes. "But I've changed. I'm not that person anymore. I've spent years trying to make amends, to become worthy of you." "I know you're not," I said, my gaze steady, unwavering. "And I'm happy for you. I truly am. I hope you find the peace you're looking for. But I've changed too. The woman you loved, the woman who would have done anything for you, she doesn't exist anymore. You and your family, you destroyed her. And from her ashes, I built a new life, a life that I love, a life that is mine. Leo and I, we're happy. We're whole. We don't need you to complete us. We completed ourselves." I stood up, the last rays of the setting sun casting a long shadow on the ground, a symbolic end to a chapter of my life. "You can be a part of Leo's life if you want," I said, offering him a small, fragile olive branch, a concession born not of lingering affection, but of a mother's desire for her child to know his father. He deserves to know his father. But that's all I can give you. We can never go back to what we were. And I will not allow you to disrupt the peace we have found." He nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet, heartbreaking acceptance. He had come seeking redemption, a second chance, a return to a past that no longer existed. But he had found something else instead, the quiet, unyielding strength of a woman who had learned to save herself, who had built her own empire of happiness and self-worth. He had found the consequences of his choices and the unmovable wall of my self-respect. I still lie awake wondering, what would you have done when they tried to control your body? Share your truth in the comments. Subscribe for more shocking family revelations. As I walked away, leaving him alone on that bench with his regrets and his newfound freedom, I felt a sense of closure, a quiet peace that settled deep within my soul. The story of Samantha and Jack was over, But this story of Samantha and Leo, the story of a mother and her son, the story of a woman who had found her own power, her own voice, her own happy ending, was just beginning. I looked up at the first star of the evening, a tiny, defiant pinprick of light in the vast, darkening sky, and I smiled. I was finally free. Free from the past, free from fear, free to embrace the beautiful, messy, extraordinary life I had built for myself and my son. And in that freedom, I found everything I had ever truly needed.